Have you ever stopped to think about what's really powering our modern world? I'm talking about the electric car you're maybe thinking of buying, those massive wind turbines you see on the horizon, or even the super advanced defense systems that countries rely on. Well, the answer, surprisingly, often comes down to a set of incredibly powerful magnets. And behind those magnets, there's a hidden global struggle going on. So let's dive into this high-stakes race for what are called rare earths. And look, this isn't some abstract economic theory. It's real, and it's happening right now. As this report from the Korea Institute for International Economic Policy puts it so clearly, this is a main battleground, a principal front in the strategic competition between the US and China. The stakes, they really couldn't be any higher. So, what exactly are we talking about here? Rare earth elements. It's a group of 17 different metals. And here's the first thing you gotta know. The name is kind of misleading. They aren't actually rare in the ground. The real problem, the bottleneck, is that they're incredibly difficult and expensive to mine and then separate from each other. And that whole process, it has some pretty massive environmental consequences. And all of that brings us right to the heart of our story today, the new magnet struggle. This is a conflict that's really set to define the technological and, frankly, the economic landscape of the 21st century. Because let's be clear, this isn't just about digging some special rocks out of the ground. It's about what you can do with them. It's about these ultra-high-performance permanent magnets, specifically neodymium iron boron magnets. These are the secret sauce that makes EV motors so efficient, that makes giant wind turbines actually viable, and that makes guided missiles so precise. You know, a huge part of the global green energy transition literally depends on having a steady supply of these things. They are, and I'm not exaggerating, the engine of modern technology. So the big question is, how did this absolutely critical supply chain get so concentrated in just one country? To get that, we have to look back at a really brilliant decades-long strategy that piece by piece built a global monopoly. I mean, just look at this chart. The scale of it is just staggering. Go back to 2011, and data from the US Geological Survey showed China was pumping out 95% of all rare earths. 95%! For a long time, America had been a leader in this space, but by this point, its market share was, well, it was basically a rounding error. And believe me, this did not happen by accident. So, the first key piece of the puzzle was a classic business strategy called vertical integration. Instead of just mining the raw materials and selling them, China systematically built out the entire value chain. They controlled the mines, they mastered the super difficult separation process, they learned how to create the metal alloys, and then, the final step, they manufactured the finished high-tech magnets themselves. They controlled it all, from top to bottom. But you see, controlling the supply chain, that was only half the story. The real genius move, and the most powerful weapon they had, was figuring out how to manipulate the market's natural price cycle. Okay, analysts have a name for this. They call it strategic foreclosure. And here's how it worked step by step. First, some kind of disruption happens, and prices for rare earths would just skyrocket. Now, seeing those crazy high prices, investors in the US or Australia would pour money into opening new mines. But then, and here's the kicker, just as those super expensive new projects were about to come online, China would flood the market with its own low-cost supply. Prices would totally collapse, and those foreign projects, they'd become unprofitable before they even got started. They'd go bankrupt, and production would once again be, you guessed it, reconcentrated back in China. This wasn't a normal market cycle. It was a strategic weapon to crush the competition. Now, for years and years, it seemed like the West just couldn't break this cycle. But recently, the United States and its allies have rolled out a really sophisticated countermove, something we can call the price shield. They finally realized they couldn't win just by opening another mine. That wasn't the issue. They had to neutralize China's main economic weapon, that engineered price collapse. They had to go after the volatility itself. And they did it with a surprisingly simple but incredibly powerful tool, a price floor. The US government, working with private companies, essentially established a guaranteed minimum price for the two most critical magnet materials. And that price, right around $110,000 per ton. That number changes the entire game. This slide just lays it out perfectly. It really is a tale of two strategies. On one side, you have the weapon, using wild price swings and extreme volatility to scare away investors and bankrupt anyone who tries to compete. And on the other side, you have the shield, creating a stable price floor that guarantees new projects can be profitable. It sends a clear signal to investors that this is a safe, long-term bet, which is exactly what you need to build a whole new supply chain. It's a direct counterpunch. Okay, so a government policy is one thing, but it's only as good as the companies on the ground who can actually make it happen. So who is the West betting on to build this new, resilient supply chain? In these high-stakes game, it's really boiled down to two major players outside of China. These are the corporate champions, the vanguard, leading this push for resource independence. So on one side, you've got MP Materials. They're America's only fully integrated producer, and they operate the legendary Mountain Pass mine out in California. And on the other side, you have Australia's Lynas Rare Earths, a global leader with major operations in Australia and Malaysia. But what's really fascinating here is just how similar they are. Their market caps are nearly identical. And check this out. Both are deeply partnered with the U.S. Department of Defense to build out a secure domestic supply chain. So all the pieces seem to be in place. The strategy is clear. The champions have been picked. But is the West actually winning this resource race? Well, that's where the future gets very, very uncertain. Let's just hop in a time machine and go back about a decade. In 2014, a big, detailed academic paper came out, and it confidently predicted that China's dominance in this market was temporary, just a transitory phenomenon. And, the logic was pretty sound. Based on classic market economics, the paper argued that, hey, these high prices will eventually encourage new suppliers to jump in, and by the end of the 2010s, China's market power would just naturally fade away. But that analysis was from a completely different world, wasn't it? That was before the US-China trade wars really heated up. It was before anyone had invented a strategic tool like the price floor. It was before rare earths became an explicit frontline issue in geopolitics. So we have to ask ourselves, after everything that's happened, is China's market power really still just a transitory phenomenon? Or has the entire game fundamentally changed? The price shield is up, and new Western mines are starting to ramp up production. But this isn't a static game. China's already making its own countermoves, like putting export controls on magnet technology. And it leaves us with the single biggest question of all. In this global magnet struggle, who is going to control the critical supply chains of tomorrow?